funded by the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland with the television licence fee.
Over the years, many Irish missionary women have done Trojan work in various faraway lands, whether helping to establish and run schools, medical clinics or hospitals in Africa, or working among the poor in the barrios of a South American city, or 1,001 other similar scenarios. What unites such women is their undying passion for life and social justice.
When I entered, I gave myself, as it were, I gave myself to God and to the mission to do good.
Reaching out to the poor, the really poor, and not to be talking about it, just to go and look after them.
You're out to help the really poor people.
We always work among the more disadvantaged people.
The people came up very well through education and through support and all that kind of thing, that they were able to do things for themselves.
Compassion and kindness, reaching out to people.
You've come to give service.
The meaning of mission is to help people realise that they're loved.
Over the next 3 programmes in this They Dared to Care series, we're going to investigate the stories of several Irish missionary sisters. To begin, we focus on Africa. In the year 1957, Mary O'Brien joined the Franciscan Missionary Sisters for Africa. After successfully completing her training to be a nun and also a nurse, she eventually went out to Kenya in 1965.
I arrived in Kenya, and I was first of all in a bush hospital up the mountain near Bondo Hospital, and it was a very challenging place. We had a training school for community nurses, and I was just raw out from training, and I had to deal with a lot of challenges, difficult maternity cases, and sometimes we had no doctor because the doctors came from abroad, and they'd come for maybe a couple of years and then they'd go again. So it was difficult because the women there came in after long labours and sometimes they needed assistance, and so we had to spend many hours in the labour ward, and I often said the best prayers I ever said were in the labour ward, asking God to help me to manage the particular case. And in those early days, it wasn't a disposable age. So, for instance, in the hospital, we had glass syringes and you had to sterilise them. We didn't have proper fluid for drip sets. We had to make our own saline mixtures. On a Saturday, we spent the afternoon making our drip sets. It was so difficult, and we had a very simple little lab. And even though I was only a nurse, I had to give anaesthetics when we did have a doctor. And this was very scary. A woman having a caesarean section, and I was the one given the anaesthetic, with minimal training in anaesthesia. So there were great challenges trying to, and then these difficult maternity cases. It was certainly, to be thrown in at the deep end straight from a hospital in England or Ireland was a big, big challenge.
Kind of,
the Lord was with us, and we had great faith and trust in Him that He would sustain us, and He did. And I mean, we were still able to help many people, even in those conditions. In that hospital in Kenya, we started training community nurses, and we have to bear in mind that at that time, most of the girls, if they finished grade 7 in primary school, that was a big thing. So the girls that finished grade 7, if they were anyway smart, they went to do some teacher training, and the ones who weren't so smart went for nursing. So the first few we had, they all failed. So we had to train and work hard to get their standard up. And then we did train some community nurses, and these proved to be invaluable. And when they were trained, we used to send them out to other hospitals, and they went down to our own other hospitals down in Kitui, in Modali and Kimangao, and they did great service there. So this was again empowering the girls. Even though they'd only had a few years in primary school, we were able to train them as community nurses. And they were able to do deliveries and everything. So it was hard work to train them, but it was very rewarding when they went out. They had to do their official examination, and then they were sent out to other hospitals, and they carried on the good work there.
And after several years of nursing and also training community nurses in Kenya, Mary O'Brien went to London to undertake further training there.
I was sent to London to do an administration course in the Royal College of Nursing for a year, and then I was sent to Uganda to be matron of Nsambia Hospital, which was a bigger hospital. Again, it was challenging there because it was a big hospital and we had a training school for nurses and midwifery, and there was a lot of challenges in running the hospital.
This would have been 1970, Sister, if I'm correct, mid-1970s onwards.
That's right. And at that time, we had our President Amin, who was creating a lot of problems, and we all had to go to be counted, and we didn't know whether we were going to be deported. Some people had to leave because they found their work permits weren't in order. But so it was trying times. Anyway, I enjoyed the work, but then after 3 years I was sent back to Ireland. I was elected to do some administration there. Then after that I was sent to Zambia, and Zambia was another country to get used to. I loved the Zambian people, and our sisters were in different missions, and I used to go around. I was regional, and I had to visit the sisters in different places and to enter into their experiences. After that, I was sent back to Ireland again for more administration for 10 years. But then in the early 90s, then I went back to Zambia. And this time I felt I needed a different apostolate, so I did some months training in HIV/AIDS. I went to James's Hospital and another place and got some information about how to treat people with AIDS. So then I went to Livingstone in Zambia, and I started a program for home-based care for people suffering from AIDS. So for the last 23 years, I have been looking after HIV, AIDS patients and TB patients in their homes. And 20 years ago, the needs were different because there were no antiretroviral drugs, and people were living in terrible conditions. They were ostracized, and they had no support system. They were full of infections and opportunistic infections, very, very sick people, often isolated into a little kitchen out in the backyard. And they had no simple remedies, no soap, no Dettol, and they were dealing with constant diarrhea, rashes, you name it. And they'd get dehydrated and we'd have to take them into hospital. They might get a drip and then we'd take them back home again. And some of them had many, many visits to hospital. We had many deaths, and finance was a problem because they'd have no money even to bury the sick person when they died, and we'd have to take them by the Land Rover to the hospital and help the families to cope with the funerals. It was a very distressing time for everybody because of the lack of proper food, medical facilities, or even basic needs of people. But thanks be to God, with the arrival of antiretroviral drugs, this has made a radical change. I was then sent back to Lusaka. So in Lusaka, while I was also teaching in a directress of a Kalunda Study Centre, I still needed to get out amongst the people. So it was like two jobs. So I began visiting in Ngombe compound, and I stayed there for many years. The needs were great still: poverty, unemployment, the little houses lacking sanitation, proper facilities. There's no toilets, and TB was rampant because of the poor quality of lack of ventilation in many of the houses. So there were many sad cases there too of many people dying because of lack of any money. And here I'd like to pay tribute to all our benefactors, because without our benefactors we couldn't work. There were some organisations, but also private, personal friends who would give donations so that we could buy food for the patients, buy medicines, provide some transport for them. So while we are like the ambassadors of our benefactors, we can't do the work without help. So people have been tremendous in assisting us to carry out so that we can show the love and compassion of Christ. So this work was quite demanding, but very fulfilling, because at the end of the day you could say, well, thanks be to God, I was able to help some people. People often say, do you not get depressed looking at the magnitude of the problems? But my philosophy also was, it's better to light a penny candle than curse the darkness. Do what you can where you are, and at least if you can improve the life of even a few people, it's a worthwhile life.
And turning now to South America, in the year 2007, Sister Eileen Rabbit of the Columban Missionary Sisters was living and working in a place called Ica in Peru, when suddenly disaster struck.
In 2007, I'll never forget it, August 14 at 20 to 7, 2007, myself and Bridget Sullivan from County Clare, Kilrush, County Clare, we were there together, the two of us. And Bridie Law, who is a woman here in the house, she's from Roscommon, she was home on home leave at the time. We were having our tea at 20 to 7 and we had felt a tremor. And Bridget had been in Peru for a huge earthquake in 1970. She had just arrived in Peru. So she was known to out the door as soon as the tremor. And we were out in the garden and it was a very, very major earthquake. So that was something that I will never forget, being there for that. It was frightening and it went on indefinitely for a couple of minutes, and the length of an earthquake and the intensity, it was very high. It was 8 or 9 or something. It was very, very bad. And I'll always remember that night. It was amazing how we managed to get through the night. We slept at some stage or other because there were tremors on and off, you know. But we didn't know the damage, the extent of the damage until next morning. And when we went out next morning, the whole village that was part of our village, all the adobe houses were down. And the people were sitting around having salvaged whatever bits of wood or whatever they could have saved from their houses. And they were sitting around their pots and pans and maybe the sashes of the windows, whatever, doors. And we just looked around and we walked around to see how they were. And they said to us, "Pero madres," but sisters, they always called us madre, "we're alive." At the epicenter was in a place called Pisco, and a church, a very fine church, came down. There were 350 people at Mass there and they were all killed. We didn't know that yet, but we were gradually getting to hear the news. But it was a terrible experience, you know, and to look all around. And we went in further to Ica and then we came home and we said, what are we to do? What can we do, you know, for the people? So we called the people. We had quite a good few people organised, you know, parish pastoral workers and youth and parents. And we called them in and we said, we are sure we'll get help, but we need to be organised. So they went out in twos and they came back and they told us food and shelter. Because everything, like supermarkets, everything was closed, because at a time like that it was a crisis, and even there was a couple of supermarkets, they were all closed down. There was looting and all that kind of thing happens, you know, and that's the reality of life. So the first donation we got was from here. Our headquarters here in Maharamore sent us $10,000. They had it because of the help of people in different ways, and different people in Catholic charities and the Columban Fathers, all kinds of people helped us. And they organised what they call, not soup kitchens, but They call them olla común. An olla is the pot that you use to boil the spuds or whatever it is, but a common pot. So they kind of organised themselves in different blocks, and Catholic Charities came, and we were really able to help them in food. Shelter, they needed shelter. What they really wanted were sheets of bamboo netting, these bamboo huts. Overnight, because of the earthquake, the price of a bamboo hut went up, tripled. Unbelievable. And they weren't to be had, because all kinds of people who had the money and had the possibility, shopkeepers and business people, they needed to surround their area because there would be looting, people were in a terrible situation. So we had a very good helper, one of our sisters in Lima, God rest her, she died since, Mary O'Dea from County Clare, Quinn, County Clare. She was a very good businesswoman, and she got us a certain kind of a plastic, synthetic material, and we were able to give out 500 shelters. The couple of carpenters, they were close to us, people we knew, they made a kind of a model of what they could do, and the people came. We got trucks from Lima. We were able to do all of that with the money that we got. Priest, a friend of ours, a friend of the sisters in Lima, where our centre house was, gave us 2 of his trustworthy drivers, because they would need 2 to come down. On the way down, they could be looted also, because all the places along the way were affected. But anyhow, it was really something, because during that period of emergency went on for a couple of months, until the people began to get back into. And after the emergency situation you can't keep on handing out all the time, but it had to be at the beginning. And then we decided that we could build. We worked with an NGO, who was another parish, introduced us to an NGO group. And with their help, we wouldn't have known anything about building houses, but we supplied the money, and the people came up with whatever they could come up with, And we had a friend who was a solicitor, and you had to do a lot of paperwork with the people, because you're not going to build a house unless the land is
title deeds and so on.
Deeds, and that's the problem with the poverty-stricken people. They take a piece of land and they don't think about title deeds, but I tell you, after that they did, So we were able to put up 21 or 22 basic brick houses, 2 bedrooms, a common room, a shower and a toilet. And because we're in the deserts, they would make their kitchen out in the back, So that was a time when we really felt it was a great privilege to be there and to be able to just be the ones to give out the help that we got from people on.
The conduit of aid, so to speak.
Yeah.
You were the trusted agents on the ground. In other words, people knew they gave the money to you, it was going to get to where it had to get to, and it wasn't going to go into a bottomless pit and disappear.
Exactly. And, that's talking about politics. The government helped people who had the government ticket, if you like, And it was amazing when I think of what we were able to do with the little, because comparatively speaking it was little, although it was big from the point of view of the people who helped us. But all that came in from overseas to Peru at that time, it just was all kinds of question marks. And I remember towards the end of getting the houses up, I remember a couple of the women, they went up to the altar one evening in our chapel after the evening service. We didn't have a resident priest, so many times we would do the evening service ourselves, And she went up and she thanked the Columban sisters who really stood by them when the government forgot about them, So it was a time, of being very close to the people.
And you've just been listening to Sister Eileen Rabbit of the Columban Missionary Sisters relate some of her recent experiences in Peru. Now, staying with missionary experiences, after successfully training to be a nun and also a nurse, Sister Josephine Russell of the Holy Rosary Missionary Sisters went to Cameroon in 1967.
I was assigned to Cameroon to the Diocese of Buea at the time, and I was to open a maternity. Now, The building wasn't even built at the time, so I was there for the building of it, even though I know nothing about building, but there was a very good Mill Hill brother. He did all the building, obviously. Then the maternity opened in August, on the 6th of August, 1967, and our first baby was born a week later, unexpectedly. And at the time, we had 2 beds in the maternity. We had no cots because we weren't prepared for deliveries. But anyway, I delivered the first baby and we managed without all the equipment I was used to in Holles Street. But thank God, everything went well.
So what were the big challenges for Josephine Russell in establishing a maternity hospital upon her arrival out to Cameroon in 1967?
Setting up a maternity was difficult. When there were difficult cases, obviously, we transferred them to the nearest hospital, which was about 10 miles away. So you can imagine travelling 10 miles on atrocious roads in a Land Rover with a woman in labour. Very often, of course, she delivered in the Land Rover, which was fine if she delivered normally. But we hoped that they would reach the hospital and get good care and all that. But thank God that no woman died on me, no. But when it got going and the babies were coming, and of course we had the outpatient clinic as well, very often in the morning we would have 100 outpatients, as well as the maternity. And then eventually, when the maternity got underway, we had 56 beds. So they were always full, and more than full, between the maternity and the sick outpatients, people who were admitted. Then I was in Bowie Maternity then for 2.5 years. But as I was alone in the maternity, after 2.5, almost 3 years, I was worn out, so they sent me home for leave. Then I went back a few months later, and I was assigned to another maternity in Acum, which was in Bamenda Diocese. And I was there for 17 years, and that was wonderful. I loved that. The mothers and the babies, and of course the sick people as well in the outpatient clinic. At times we were called out, quite a number of times indeed we were called out. Somebody would come and say, "Sister, some woman has delivered in the farm." So we would take off to the farm to pick up the mother and the baby. I would say to the mother, like, "Why didn't you come on time?" Well, she said, "I had a pain in my back, but I have a pain in my back every day, so I didn't know it was any different. And the baby came too quick," or something like that. Or some other woman delivered on the road. She was on the way to the maternity and she delivered on the road. So we go out to pick her up and the baby. And again, thank God, they were all happy results. One day I was in town and I was stopped in the town by 2 sisters, actually, Franciscan sisters. And they said to me, "Sister, we found a baby in the bush, a newborn baby. Will you take the baby?" Oh, I said, "I will." Who was the mother? There was no idea who the mother was. So I picked up the baby. They had already taken the baby to the hospital and the cord was fixed and the baby was looked after there. So I went down to the town and I bought a baby bottle and milk and I picked up my baby and I went back to the maternity. And as I drove into the maternity, one of the nurses came out and, "Oh," she said, "newborn baby, where's the mother?" I said, "I'm the mother now." So, of course, they were laughing at me. So we took in the baby anyway and we cared for the baby for 3 weeks. And then those Franciscan sisters came and they took the baby. They said they had found a family who would adopt this baby. The mother was never discovered and, of course, the father was never discovered. It was a beautiful baby. So the girls in the hospital, actually, the nurses, or the young girls who were helping me out, they called the baby Innocent. because the baby was innocent. And the women who were in the maternity, they all donated something for the baby. In their own poverty, they all gave one small thing for the baby. So the baby went away well dressed and well cared for. Then, after that, 17 years, I came home and I did 4 years in Ireland, working in Killishandra, in Castleshanahan at the time, and some of the time in Dublin. I was in Temple Road. That was our own nursing home at the time, so I was caring for the 6 sisters there. Then in 1991, I was assigned back to Cameroon, to a very remote area in Cameroon, starting off a community there with 2 other sisters. And again, what we were involved in there was, I suppose, what we'd call pastoral work. And that was just wonderful. I loved that too. We started various groups. I had a big group of widows. Now, at the time, the AIDS problem was beginning, really. It had been there previously, of course, but it was never, I suppose, diagnosed or recognised. So it had become a big problem. So we started, I did a counselling course then, and with another family life man, we started this family life programme, which included care of AIDS patients. I did a lot of visitation in the place where I was in Du. It was a village, small village really, with a lot of problems, poverty and so on. And of course the AIDS problem added to the poverty and discrimination and all kinds of things like that. So I did a lot of working with the AIDS patients. I gave a lot of seminars, generally for prevention, helping young people in the prevention of AIDS, but also helping those who were affected as well as infected to care for others. So we did a home-based care training for a number of people, and they then took on the work of visiting and caring for people in their own homes.
And to hear more inspirational stories of Irish missionary sisters working in faraway lands, then make sure to catch our next number 2 programme in this 3-part They Dared to Care series. From myself, Paul Wright, bye for now.
Funded by the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland with the television licence fee.